Like Chrissy said, my name is Collin Makamson. I'm the Assistant Director of Education for Curriculum here at the National World War II Museum. So I primarily work with teachers and students, and the census and census data is a great just gold mine of stats and facts and figures that could really be used in a lot of different ways in the classroom, both looking at sort of the growth of cities or the increase in life expectancy, GDP, things like that. But the census is also something that's just a lot of fun. It's something that's a lot of fun to work with, just to see where your family, whenever they've arrived, if they've been here for a while or newly arrived, what they were doing at the time the census was taken. It's really personal as well. If you take the time, and I'll show where you can access the 1940 census at the end of the talk, you can really, you can see parts of your history, and it's really cool to see that. So there's an educational side, and there's also sort of like a genealogical, personal side of this too that always interests me as well. So the 1940 census, and we have here a great image from the run-up to the census, encouraging Americans to respond to the census when the census enumerator came to their door. So it's your America, help the 10-year roll call. And underneath that sort of caricature of Uncle Sam taking down the list, you see certain things that the census relates to. What does the census do? In the United States, the census is about enumeration, and it determines apportionment. That is the number of representatives that a state will have in the Congress. But it does a lot more than that. It determines funding for federal and state projects. Today it does everything from looking at infrastructure improvements to special education funding to free and reduced lunches for schools, even habitat and wilderness area restoration, something that we take pretty seriously here in Louisiana. So the census of 1940 was the 16th census in the United States history. They started in 1790, and every 10 years there was a number enumeration. And most of them are accessible in some form or another. Obviously, the data collected in 1790 or 1800 is going to be vastly different to what might have been collected in 1930 or 1940. And censuses also something that are not a new concept. They're very old. Probably letting in about my sort of Sunday school upbringing, I first learned about censuses in the story of the Bible of Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem to be registered from the census being taken. But they exist all throughout history, all over the world. Egypt, India, in England, there's the famous one after the Norman Conquest, the Domesday Book. William the Conqueror literally saying, "I want to know how many oxen, sheep, and swine I have in my new kingdom, and how much I can tax my new citizens, or my new subjects rather." So they're a really old concept, but like I said, they can reveal a whole lot. And Kay, can I have that next slide, please? So in this passage here, this is where the census is outlined in the U.S. Constitution. If any of y'all were interested in where the government has the legal mandate to do this, it comes in Article 1, Section 2, and it's the sort of the third paragraph there, talking about apportionment, and obviously down there talking about where's the long first sentence at the end, talking about adding to the whole number of free persons, and then 3/5 of all other persons. And of course, that is reference to the 3/5 compromise of 1787 of how enslaved people, enslaved African slaves would be enumerated and count towards the state or territory's total. So Article 1, Section 2 sets this out, that every 10 years there would be an enumeration. And there has been every year since 1790, every 10 years, there's been a census taken. Have the next one, Kate. So, like I said, the census of 1940 is the 16th in the nation's history. Also, surprisingly enough, especially given his unprecedented term in office, this is the only census under which Franklin Roosevelt presides. So it's really interesting in that way. So you think he would have sat on 2 of them, but this is the only one. And this is a pamphlet from the Census Bureau. The Census Bureau has existed as an independent bureau since 1902. headquartered in Washington, now headquartered in Maryland. But it was the job of the Census Bureau to put out instructions, set up field offices, and really coordinate this great counting, this great enumeration. And this guidebook is the Instructions to Enumerators from 1940. And this was given to all of the people who were signing up to conduct the census. And unlike today, where we're probably getting emails or little mailers to our house to do the census online, the census of 1940, it was done all door to door. Around 120,000 enumerators all over the country and across major American territories as well. Guam, Alaska, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, really wanted to get an accurate count of America's population. And in this guide to enumeration, this gentleman here, you can actually go to the next slide, Kate. That is William Lane Austin. He's from Mississippi. He was the head, he was the director of the Census Bureau in 1940. And in that guidebook from the guidebook for enumerators, he made clear instructions that enumerators were to visit every house, building, tent, cabin, hut, or other place in which any person might live or stay to ensure that no person is omitted from the enumeration. The guidebooks are, it's really in-depth instruction. They're very precise as well. Again, we think of enumerators or the census being taken today by people with handheld devices, computers, laptops, smartphones. This is literally a person with a pen and paper going door to door. So other instructions in the guide to enumeration includes use black ink, write legibly, and keep your schedules neat and clean. Enumerate all men, women, and children, including infants. Enumerate all persons in hotels, tourists, or trailer camps, missions, or cheap one-night lodging houses, AKA flop houses. His words, not mine. So the idea of getting everyone a really accurate survey, as accurate as possible, of what was happening in the United States. And that's William Lane Austin there with FDR. Like I said, this is the only census that FDR presided over, and there he is having his census taken. I can have the next picture. It's really cool as well. So this is the census schedule, the census survey taken from the White House in 1940. And here we see down in red, and this is what the census looks like online too. We'll show you guys a little bit later when you access them. You can zoom in, but also you can see that it's written right there in that red box, Franklin Roosevelt. This census interview was taken in April 2nd, 1940 by enumerator Raymond Conley. And along with FDR, it counted First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, his personal secretary, Marguerite LaHand, cousin Elizabeth Henderson, who was visiting, governess Elspeth Conkey, and servants Ida Allen, Armstead Barnett, Ella Sampson, and George Fields. So for any younger viewers who may not read cursive script that well, have a mom or dad or a teacher or someone to guide you through this, because a lot of this is written in cursive script. It's also, again, talking about wanting to make sure things are legible. Imagine having an enumerator who had poor handwriting. They could mess up the whole thing. So I don't know if they had handwriting tests or instructions or a test they had to pass. I'm not sure, but it was very important. Can I have the next slide, please? So in 1940, the census was taken. The last time it was taken was in 1930. So a lot has changed. 1930, America is really gripped by the Depression. So the 1940 census wants to see how the United States is doing and recovering. They want to see sort of the fruits of the New Deal and wanting to see America's population, its employment indexes, median incomes. But then also the 1940 census does some unique things too that we'll talk about later in our talk. So in terms of finding everyone, enumerating everyone where people might be, this is a great National Archives image, and the caption reads, "Enumeration, no kind of habitation was missed. Including among the places are railroad section hands." So these are folks who work on the railroads, living in what looks like a trail, like a box car, having their census being taken, a family of 4, it looks like. Have the next slide, please. So here we again have an enumerator, and we'll see this gentleman in the next image as well, out in the field asking questions. And the questions that people were asked were similar to the questions they were asked in 1930. Age, sex, what their job was, profession, how many were in the household, were they married, things of that nature as well. The 1940 census really demonstrated once the data was collected. The census was begun in April of 1940 and was completed over the summer and fall with information presented to the president in December. The 40 census showed a nation emerging out of the Depression, but it showed that a lot of things had changed. The 1940 census asked questions about housing and habitation. This was to get accurate data, but also this underscores the influence of the great internal migrations that took place in the United States during the Great Depression. Things like the Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck, things like that, of people being uprooted for lack of employment, or the Dust Bowl, farms just turning and withering away to nothing, where they were migrating to, and then also what services they had enjoyed. Had they been part of a CCC camp? Did they have a social security number? Had they been involved in any WPA projects as well? Now the next slide. So there's our fellow again. I said we see him again. Here he's in this very next image. And this fellow here is an enumerator. Like I said, that's the official term for a census taker. And for the 1940 census, there were over 120,000 temporary census workers employed, mostly college graduates, collecting information, like I said, about household size, home ownership, age, occupation, literacy, place of birth, marital status, and race. The last issue proving very controversial in the questions that were asked, and the answers that were available to be given to questions of race. The 1940 census answered the broad questions, of course. Like I said, some things had changed in 1930 to 1940, some things hadn't. New York was still the most populous city in the Union, just as it had been in every census since 1790, so quite the win streak. Followed behind it were Chicago and Philadelphia, the same three cities sitting in that same order in 1940 as they had in 1930 as well. The population of the U.S. Was determined to be in 1940 132,164,569 people, an increase of about 7.3% over the previous 10 years. And interestingly, it's the first decade in American history in which immigration was not a factor in population growth. This is owing to a lot of restricted and exclusionary immigration legislation that was passed in the 1920s and 30s. It's 1940 is a first for a lot of ways. It's the first census, the first occasion when the population of every state in the Union, all 48 at the time, Alaska and Hawaii had not yet come in, but the population of every U.S. state was at least 100,000 people, 100,000 people. I love stats and figures, and especially if you do too, if you run a quiz or trivia night, pub quiz, things like that, the census is a perfect place to draw these things from. The median annual wage or salary for men and women stood at, for men, $956, and for women at $592. Calculated for inflation, that's about $15,000 for men and $9,000 for women in today's currency. The proportion of Americans living in urban centers grew to about 56.5%, so the majority of Americans living in the cities by 1940. The average life expectancy improved to 62.9 years. In 1940, only 5% of Americans held a bachelor's degree or higher. 5.1 million Americans lived on farms they either owned or worked on as tenants. And then these little snapshot facts as well that are great. The annual diphtheria death rate, the production rates of oleo, butter, and margarine, households lacking indoor plumbing, and the precise number of cases of identical twins. All of these things and more are revealed in the pages of the 1940 census. It was begun in April 1940, so what's happening in the world at that time? The United States is still on a peacetime footing, of course, and this is when the phony war is period in Europe. France and the Low Countries are a month away from being invaded. They're still standing. Germany has just invaded Denmark and Norway. The Kaitan massacre, the execution and cover-up of Polish intelligentsia and prisoners by the Soviet Union begins in April and through May. The first issue of DC Comics' Batman comic book is issued in April 24th of 1940. And the Selective Service Act is still months away, not passed until September of 1940. So America's still in a peacetime footing. The 1940 census really giving a glimpse of a world that's soon to be plunged into war. I'm going to have the next slide, please. And again, talking about enumerators going everywhere, another great National Archives image. This is enumeration. Alaska 2 saw the census enumerator arrive, this time in his dog sled. So again, Alaska, not yet a state, but enumeration took place there with this team of dogs going to find people in the Alaskan wilderness. I don't know how they did that. So the 1940 census, like I said, it's great for stats and facts and figures, but unless you're really looking for that type of trivia or minutia, it's also revolutionary for, it was the first time that the census asked sampling questions, sort of a sample size, as we call it today. They called it back then a sampling line. So the 1940 census, everyone got 34 standard questions we talked about earlier: name, age, place of birth, etc. But to get a nice sample size, 1 out of every 20 individuals enumerated or asked questions were given an additional supplementary survey called a sampling line. And these allowed the census to look deeper into the American population without creating an undue burden. If they were asking this to everybody, they would need a lot more enumerators, but asking 1 person out of 20 isn't so bad. And these were really, really interesting questions. They asked about people's veteran status. For the first time, they asked people conducted in a census their mother tongue or birthplace of their parents if they were newly arrived, whether or not they had a social security number or had participated in any New Deal programs, how many times they've been pregnant, how many times they've been married. And the 1940 census really, really pioneered this. And they also asked questions, like I said earlier, about housing as well. So those conducted, given the 34 standard questions, those included in that sample size, asking questions about housing, wanted to know about if they had radios, flush toilets, running water, and if the principal lighting was provided by gas, electricity, or kerosene. 10 years after the stock market crash, there were 37.2 million housing units of various shapes, types, and sizes in 1940, as counted in the census. And this sum included everything from mansions and farms to boxcars and trailer camps. The census records that we do today, the census of 2020, if you've done it or are planning to do it, it's much shorter. The questions are more precise, but they do owe a great influence to the census of 1940, that sampling size of wanting to get a closer snapshot and case studies of Americans. Can I have the next slide, please? So here we see some census records in a census record office for people who are curious. The census was collected, it was photographed on microfilm, and then the original rolls were destroyed. And these are census office workers taking care of that. Some of you watching this may have volunteered or worked the census before. I know my grandmother on my mother's side did in 1950. There's been some famous folks in American history who've also been census workers as well and have really pioneered some important techniques. In 1890, Alexander Graham Bell was a census worker and an official. He was very concerned about people being left out, namely people who were deaf and blind. And he helped pioneer questions that could be answered by a deaf or blind person so that they would not be left out of the census taking. The census is also a real gold mine of facts and figures, like I said, and a lot of people who've worked with it have turned it into some pioneering works. W.E.B. Du Bois, the African-American activist and civil rights pioneer, used the 1900 census for his 1904 book, a treatise of the Negro Farmer. So really, really important data is contained there. But again, wanting to make sure that people's privacy are protected, the census is put on microfilm delivered and then the original rolls destroyed. We'll see, however, towards the end of our talk, whether there have been instances in American history where that has not been true. Can I have the next slide, please? Great. So that census record, the census roll, the census schedule that our enumerators are filling out, this is what they look like. So look at that. That's a ton of information they're having to fill out. But again, state, county, household, the name, how you're related. You can put mother, father, son, daughter, things like that. Place of birth, employment. You can have the next slide too, Kate. And then, on the back as well. And we'll keep it here for a second. Again, a lot of information to record, and the census can tell us a lot. But just like these questions on the 2020 census aren't without their controversy, so too in the 1940 census, questions about race and how to identify race were very, very controversial. In that pamphlet enumeration guide showing how you're supposed to take the census and a guide to the people in the field to do it, there were a lot of pseudoscientific Jim Crow language included about how to designate people by their race. I can read from the quote. They contain such directives as any mixture of white and non-white blood should be recorded according to the race of the non-white parent. Or a person of mixed Negro and Indian blood should be reported as Negro unless the Indian blood greatly predominates and he is universally accepted in the community as an Indian. So not only pseudoscientific and racist, very imprecise. You see as well here on the color or race that respondents could give. America by 1940 is a vast melting pot. People from all over the world are living in America. But the choices they can respond with race are white, Negro, Indian, Chinese, Japanese, Philippine, Hindu, or Korean. So a lot left out. So there are parts of the 1940 census that are extremely accurate. There are parts that are extremely imprecise and really speak to the attitudes towards race that predominated in 1940, 80 years ago as well. Now the next slide, Kate. So one group that I'm certain would have preferred their race not be indicated on the census, and as a direct result of the census, were deprived of their civil rights were Japanese Americans living on the US West Coast. So the 1940 census, it's great. It can tell you where everyone lives, the block, the street, how many people are living there, how long they've been there, what their names are, who their relatives are. It gives a great snapshot of a community. And that information is supposed to be kept secret, supposed to be kept completely confidential and not released until 72 years after it's conducted. The 1940 census, we know that's not true. The 1940 census was one of the key tools used in the aftermath of the attack on Pearl Harbor and Executive Order 9066, the forcible removal and incarceration of Japanese Americans and those of Japanese American descent on the American West Coast. We know it from the official who was in charge of the operation, Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt, who's quoted in saying, "The single most important source of information prior to the evacuation was the 1940 census of population." And this is a big controversy because the Census Bureau has only very recently been upfront with their role in this process. They denied it for decades, but it was less than 10 years ago when irrefutable evidence was presented that the Census Bureau has been more contrite and sees this as really a black eye. The confidentiality of these American citizens and residents were betrayed, and it ultimately led to them being removed to incarceration centers in the American interior. So records are supposed to be kept secret, confidential for 72 years, were handed over to the US government 7 days after they made the request for them. And if you know the type of bureaucratic red tape, whenever you request anything from any part of the American government, a week turnaround is very, very fast. Can I have the next slide, please? So if you want to take a look at the 1940 census, It's free to do so. It's free to access. It pairs nicely if any of you use Fold3 or Ancestry. I think there's some tools and widgets and toolbars that go pair really well with it. But this is the page you'll go to, census.gov, 1940census.gov rather, and you can begin to search. Now, it's not fully transcribed. You can't type in your grandmother or grandfather's name and have it pop up. You have to go through by the census tract data, which means you have to go and find the state, the county, or parish, like here in Louisiana, and then go by scanning through these handwritten rolls. If I can have the next slide, I can show what that looks like. So this is a street in Orleans Parish in New Orleans, Louisiana. So again, it takes some time to find the information, but if you have a pretty good idea about where your relatives were living in 1940, you can go through here and you can find it. And it's really cool to see the information that's recorded there and who it was recorded by. But again, it does take time. I think they have a volunteer program, the Census, of people who like to help transcribe things to help make this work go faster. But the census was released in 2012, and it's still not fully transcribed, so a ways to go yet. And interesting as well, coming up in 2022, the 1950 census will be released, so 72 years after that census was completed. And that'll be interesting to compare with the status of what the United States looked like in 1940 versus what it looked like in 1950. 5 years after the end of the war, in the midst of the baby boom, the housing boom, really going to be a unique and really great tool for teachers and students to really sort of compare and contrast, to see this decade when American society was really transformed. So if I can have the next slide, Kate. And also this, a book, if you're interested in reading more about this is from Gray House Publishing. This was issued as almost a companion of the 2012, of the 1940 census that was released in 2012. It's called This Is Who We Were, a companion to the 1940 census. I think it's available, I think it's still in print. But it's really handsome, and it's really great because it not only has that data in nice sort of digestible chunks, but it shows some snapshots of newspapers talking about will their state lose representatives or gain representatives because of apportionment laws because of the 1940 census. Will them marveling at the houses with indoor plumbing and things like that. So it's a really cool way to look at the census, and it's a really fun book, a good reference tool to have as well. Can I have the next slide? I think I got one more. Maybe not. If I don't, just keep it there. So 72 years must pass from the date in which census data is recorded to be released. So the 2020 census, if you're responding to that now, that will not be published until the year 2092. So I won't be here to see it, but I'm sure people who will be will have fun working with it. Like I said, the 1940 census is available for free online, and it's a remarkable tool for students, historians, and lay people alike. And it really shows a critical link in our shared past and provides a window into a world that's about a year away from being plunged into war and forever changed. But that's just a quick overview of the 1940 census. The 2020 census is still ongoing. It began at the same time on Census Day, April 1. And it's ongoing now and should be completed in the fall, and its results given to the president, and preliminary results of the new population announced in December of 2020 as well. So I talked for about a half hour. So I'm going to hop in here and see if there's any questions that any of you have. I'll be happy to take them and answer them. And if there's a question I don't know the answer to, I will gladly cede the field to say I don't know, and perhaps someone who does, I can put you in contact with later. So let's see what we have. That's a good question. Do we have any idea of how many people did not participate in the census? Those counterfactuals are always hard to quantify. Obviously, people were missed. If a census worker is going by a street or a house once or twice total, of course there are going to be people missed. And also there are going to be invisible populations as well, just like there are today. of people in crowded cities, people who aren't home, people who are moving around a lot, people who may not want to people know that they're there, people who might not their immigration status might be revealed. So of course there are going to be people who are missed, and then also the regions were divided. The United States was divided up into regions of field offices in charge and giving census takers their instructions. So sure, if you had perhaps a less than competent field office administrator, you might have entire areas that are not combed as well as they should be. But certainly, I'm sure you can go through the census and find swaths of people who are underreported. But like the guide said, they were to go everywhere that people were. So they did their best, but no, I'm sure that people were actually on books of the census, the Census Bureau has a great website, and they have a ton of great sort of snapshots of what the census did every 10 years. All of them are pretty much available. 1890 is not. Most of it was destroyed in a fire, but samples at least of all the census records from 1790 on are available. But that book that I mentioned, This Is Who We Were, is a great tool to use. The 72-year gap, that was related to life expectancy at the time. The idea being you're not revealing confidential information by people who are most likely no longer going to be living. Interesting too, I was thinking as well, we always like to do oral histories and interviews with surviving veterans, people who were alive during World War II. I wonder if the Census Bureau has done oral histories or at least collected some stories from past census workers. That'd be fascinating to look at the experience of a census worker in 1940 versus one in 1960 or 1980 or 1970. That would really, really be cool. I'm sure that exists, but I'm actually thinking about looking into that more. The sampling questions are available as well. You can see a list of those. The sampling questions related to housing, and then the sampling questions that ask questions about have you been married before? Have you participated in the New Deal program? Have you moved in the last 5 years? All of those are available on the Census Bureau's website as well. So you can see the full 34 questions that everybody got, and you can see the sample questions underneath there. They're really, really revealing too. And also it's every 20th person. So it's not a perfect system, but it does give you a good sampling size. Dan, the population in the U.S. in 1940, I can scroll back to it because I get my numbers confused and I don't want to give you a wrong answer. The population of the United States in 1940, as determined by the 1940 census, was determined to be 132,164,569 people. So give or take, like I said, that last question, it's as accurate as it could be, but I'm sure there were people who were left out. People asking questions about people being dubious about being questioned for the census, or were they willingly answered? I'm certain there were people who probably didn't want all of their data or private information shared, but the rate of people who responded to it was fairly high. And who knows, if you troll through the census record, I'm sure you'll find incomplete records, or people not responding to certain questions, or perhaps being less than forthcoming. Can you find out if your family answered sample questions? Yes, you can. It'll be on there in the census record as well, down at the bottom if you scroll down as well. But very, very cool. Elaine on Facebook asked, did they take the census in Hawaii even though it was still a territory? Yes, they did. They took it in Hawaii, Guam, the American Virgin Islands, American Samoa, Alaska, Puerto Rico. So they took it wherever Americans might be. So yeah, they took it there as well. Again, I want to thank you guys for watching today, listening a little about the census. The census day is typically April 1st, but the census collecting for 2020 is still going on, and it'll be a long time before it's fully done. So I want to thank you guys for your time here today. I think Chrissy put some links up in the chat of where you can find this information. And I also wrote an article to this effect on the museum's website. on the 1940 census entitled It's Your America, the 1940 Census Today. So if you'd like some of these facts in more long form, you can find those there. Otherwise, I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Stay safe, stay tuned into what the museum's doing, and we'll talk to you again after a while. See you later, everybody.